Welcome to Café Tales. I am Alie, your host for today's mystery. We're joining the brilliant detective Nero Wolfe and his trusty assistant, Archie Goodwin. Today's story will leave you breathless as we uncover the dark secrets behind a prestigious Manhattan hotel, where a sealed room harbors deadly consequences for those who dare disturb its history. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from today. Let me know in the comments. Now prepare to be drawn into a mystery where smoke and mirrors conceal a truth that's been waiting 5 years to be revealed. Nero Wolfe and the Room 817 Chapter 1. A Matter of Smoke and Mirrors. Tuesday morning, the 4th of May, Nero Wolfe was in the plant rooms on the top floor of the old brownstone on West 35th Street, fussing over his orchids with Theodore Horseman. Their routine, like everything in Wolfe's life, ran with the precision of a Swiss watch, Fritz's nationality not being coincidental in that comparison. I was at my desk in the office, typing up the expense report from our last case, a tedious affair involving a cosmetics executive and industrial espionage that had paid well enough to keep Wolfe in imported beer and exotic plants for at least 2 months. The clock on the wall showed 10:37, which meant I had exactly 23 minutes before Wolfe would descend from his morning session with the orchids. I like to have my paperwork cleared before he settles his 1/7 of a ton into his custom-built chair. The doorbell rang. I went to answer it, secretly grateful for the interruption. Through the one-way glass, I could see a man in his 50s wearing the kind of suit that costs what most people make in a month. His gray hair was perfectly trimmed, but his face had the tight, strained look of someone who had been awake for many hours straight. I opened the door. "Good morning. Can I help you?" "I need to see Nero Wolfe," he said, his voice carrying the crisp, authoritative tone of someone used to getting his way without having to ask twice. "My name is Carter Reynolds." The name registered immediately. Carter Reynolds owned the Crestmore Grand Hotel, one of Manhattan's most prestigious establishments, along with a half-dozen other high-end properties across the country. His face occasionally appeared in the business section of the Times or in photographs at charity events, usually with a much younger wife at his side. "Mr. Wolfe is engaged until 11. I'm Archie Goodwin, his associate. May I tell him what this is about?" Reynolds glanced past me into the hallway. "It's a confidential matter. I'll wait." I could have told him that Nero Wolfe doesn't appreciate unscheduled visitors, regardless of their net worth, but I decided to let Wolfe handle that himself. I showed Reynolds into the office and offered him the red leather chair that faces Wolfe's desk. "Would you like some coffee while you wait?" "Black. No sugar," he replied, still not bothering with the social niceties. I didn't particularly care. I've dealt with ruder clients who paid less, but I made a mental note of it. When I returned with his coffee, Reynolds was standing by the bookshelves, examining the titles with the distracted air of someone whose mind is elsewhere. He accepted the cup without a word and returned to the red leather chair. At precisely 11 the elevator hummed, and moments later, Wolfe entered the office. He gave our visitor a brief glance, then moved to his desk without acknowledging him. Further, 7 years of working for Wolfe had taught me this was actually a good sign. When he's truly displeased by an intrusion, he makes it abundantly clear. Once settled in his chair, Wolfe pressed his lips together for a moment, then inclined his head 1/4 of an inch. "Good morning, sir. I am Nero Wolfe." Reynolds set his coffee down. "Carter Reynolds. I own the Crestmore Grand Hotel." "Indeed." Wolfe's fingers did their usual dance on the arms of his chair. "How may I be of service?" "I need discretion, Mr. Wolfe. Complete discretion. That is a standard provision of my professional conduct, assuming I agree to be engaged." Reynolds nodded and leaned forward. "Yesterday morning, my head manager, Victor Hollet, was found dead in one of our rooms, room 817. The police are calling it suicide. I know it wasn't. You have evidence contradicting their conclusion? Wolfe's tone was neutral. Not evidence, exactly. Knowledge. Victor wouldn't kill himself. Not now. Not in that room. Uh-huh. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. The room has significance. Reynolds set his cup down and ran a hand across his jaw. Room 8117 was sealed 5 years ago after a fire killed a young woman. The smoke detector failed. There was an investigation, lawsuits, press coverage. It was a disaster. The room was never reopened until 3 weeks ago. That caught my interest. Why reopen it now? After 5 years? Reynolds shot me an irritated glance before returning his attention to Wolfe. It was Hole's decision. He insisted that keeping it sealed was bad for business. Reminded staff of a tragedy better forgotten. Wolfe's eyebrow lifted a fraction of an inch, his equivalent of profound skepticism. And now Mr. Hole has been found dead in this very room. The coincidence strains credulity. Precisely. Reynolds leaned forward. The police see a man who hanged himself. I see a murder staged as suicide, in a room with history. Wolfe sighed. Mr. Reynolds, I do not leave my home for investigations. If you wish to engage my services, you must provide comprehensive information and accept that Mr. Goodwin and others will conduct the necessary field work. I'm aware of your methods. Your fee doesn't concern me. Money is rarely the only consideration in accepting a case, Mr. Reynolds. Wolfe's fingers tapped once on his chair. Tell me, why was the room sealed for so long? Fire damage alone wouldn't necessitate 5 years of quarantine. A flicker of something, discomfort, perhaps crossed Reynolds's face. Company policy, and respect for the deceased. Vague, said Wolfe. If you wish my help, candor is essential. Reynolds stared at him for a long moment, then relented. There were rumors, superstitions among the staff that the room was tainted. Hole didn't believe in such nonsense. And now he's dead, I added helpfully. Reynolds ignored me again. There's one more thing you should know, Mr. Wolfe. The city inspector who certified the room as safe for reopening was Elena Farrington. She's the sister of the woman who died in the fire. Wolfe's eyes opened a fraction wider, the closest. He comes to showing shock. And the hotel permitted this obvious conflict of interest? We didn't know until after Hole's death. She used her married name professionally. It was only when the police started investigating that the connection emerged. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for 10 seconds, his thinking pose. When he opened them, he looked at Reynolds with that calculating gaze I've seen 1,000 times. Your retainer will be $10,000 plus expenses. Double that amount upon successful resolution. Reynolds didn't blink at the figure. Agreed. Satisfactory. Archie will provide the necessary paperwork. Now I require complete details of all involved parties. As Reynolds began recounting the facts, I couldn't help but feel that familiar stirring of interest. A sealed room, a staged suicide, and a fire inspector with a personal vendetta. This was promising to be anything but routine. I opened my notebook and began to write. Chapter 2. Ghost. Behind the door after breakfast the next morning, Fritz's magnificent mushroom omelet and freshly baked croissants, I set out for the Cressmore Grand Hotel. Wolfe had spent the evening before absorbing every detail Reynolds could provide, then retreated to his latest book while I drew up the paperwork. Now it was my turn to do what I do best. Legwork. The Crestmore Grand stands like an elegant dowager on Fifth Avenue, its limestone facade speaking of old money and discretion. The doorman gave me the once-over as I approached, evidently deciding. My suit was acceptable enough to permit entry without challenge. The lobby was a study in understated luxury, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and furniture that cost more than most people's monthly rent. At the mahogany-paneled reception desk, I asked for the hotel's assistant manager, a woman named Diana Vance, whom Reynolds had instructed to cooperate with our investigation. "Miss Vance is expecting you, Mr. Goodwin," the crisp young man at reception said after a brief phone call. "8th floor. She'll meet you by the elevators." Diana Vance turned out to be a trim brunette in her 40s with sharp eyes and a sharper pantsuit. She greeted me with a professional smile that didn't quite reach those eyes. "Mr. Goodwin. Mr. Reynolds informed me you'd be coming. I understand you need to see room 8117? "That's right. And I'd like to hear anything you can tell me about what happened there, both 5 years ago and 2 days ago." The elevator ride up was silent. As we stepped out onto the 8th floor, I noticed the hallway was deserted, which seemed odd for mid-morning in a hotel this size. "We've temporarily relocated guests from this floor," Vance explained, catching my look. "The police have finished their investigation, but Mr. Reynolds thought it best." She led me down the carpeted corridor to room 817. Unlike the neighboring doors, this one had a different electronic lock, newer, with a small, digital display. Vance swiped a master keycard and pushed the door open. "I'll wait out here," she said. "Take as long as you need." The room was immaculate. Too immaculate. Everything from the made bed to the arranged toiletries on the bathroom counter looked staged, like a display room rather than a place where a man had died less than 48 hours earlier. "Has this room been cleaned since Hole's body was found?" I asked, turning back to Vance, who stood in the doorway. She hesitated. "Standard procedure after the police release a scene." "Convenient," I remarked, almost like someone wanted to eliminate evidence. "The police had no objections," she replied stiffly. I walked slowly around the room, taking in details. It was a standard upscale hotel room. King bed, desk, armchair, flat-screen TV, minibar. The bathroom was marble and glass, with high-end fixtures. Nothing out of the ordinary. "Tell me about the fire," I said, examining the ceiling where a modern smoke detector was now prominently installed. Vance crossed her arms. "It happened around 2 odd a.m. A guest in room 817, Melissa Farrington, 28 years old, died from smoke inhalation. The fire started from a faulty lamp wire. The smoke detector failed to activate. The room's been sealed since then. Until 3 weeks ago." "Yes, Mr. Hole felt it was time to move past the tragedy." I moved to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. "Why would your head manager choose this particular room to hang himself in? Seems like an odd coincidence." "I couldn't say," Vance replied, but there was something in her tone that suggested otherwise. "You worked with Hole for how long? 8 years? And you have no theory about why he might choose the one room in this hotel with a tragic history?" She shifted her weight. "Victor was troubled lately, distracted. But suicide? I still can't believe it." I knelt down to examine the ventilation grate near the floor and noticed something caught in its slats. Carefully, I extracted what appeared to be a partially burned business card. Only a corner remained intact, showing the letters EF and what might have been a city department logo. I pocketed it before Vance could see. "Who discovered Hole's body?" I asked, rising to my feet. "Housekeeping. Maria Delgado." She came in for morning turndown and found him hanging from the shower rod. I'd like to speak with her. Vance shook her head. She's on leave. The experience was traumatic. Where did she go? I don't see how that's relevant. Everything's relevant until proven otherwise. That's how investigations work. Vance's professional demeanor cracked slightly. Mr. Goodwin, we've had police tramping through this hotel for 2 days. Our guests are concerned. Our staff is on edge, and Mr. Reynolds may have hired you, but I have a hotel to run. All the more reason to resolve this quickly, I countered. I need to speak with your security chief and see any camera footage from the night Alie died. That won't be possible without proper authorization, came a deep voice from behind Vance. A tall man in a tailored suit that couldn't quite disguise his muscular build stepped into view. He had the bearing of an ex-military man and the eyes of someone who didn't like surprises. Miles Braddock, head of security, he said without offering his hand. All security footage and access records are confidential. If the police didn't request it, you certainly can't have it. I gave him my most winning smile. Mr. Reynolds hired Nero Wolfe to investigate this matter. That makes me an authorized representative. Not to me, it doesn't. Braddock replied. I need explicit instructions from Mr. Reynolds himself. Then why don't we call him? Mr. Reynolds is in London on business, Vance interjected. He won't be back until Friday. How convenient that Reynolds had neglected to mention his international travel plans when engaging Wolfe yesterday. I made a mental note to have a frank discussion about transparency when he returned. In the meantime, Braddock continued, I'll need to escort you from the premises, Mr. Goodwin. This is a private establishment, and your tour ends now. As I was being firmly guided toward the elevator, I noticed a maintenance worker emerging from a service door at the far end of the hallway. Something about his furtive glance in our direction caught my attention, but before I could react, Braddock's hand was on my elbow, steering me into the waiting elevator. I left with more questions than answers, and a partially burned business card in my pocket that might be nothing, or might be everything. One thing was certain. The Crestmore Grand was hiding something behind its polished facade, and room 817 held secrets that someone didn't want uncovered. I needed to find Maria Delgado. And fast. Chapter 3. Family Ember's Eye. Returned to the brownstone to find Wolfe at his desk, a book open before him and a bottle of beer at his elbow. The clock showed 1:43, which meant I'd arrived back during his sacred reading period. He didn't look up when I entered, but I knew he was aware of my presence. I've been evicted from the Crestmore Grand, I announced, dropping into my chair. The head of security decided I wasn't welcome once I started asking about camera footage. Wolfe turned a page. Interesting. There's more. I pulled out the partially burned business card I'd found. This was caught in the ventilation grate in room 817. Only part of it survived, but you can make out EF and what looks like a city department logo. That got his attention. He set his book down and took the card fragment, examining it with narrowed eyes. EF. Elena Farrington, perhaps? The fire inspector who is also sister to the deceased? That's my guess. And Reynolds conveniently forgot to mention he'd be jetting off to London today. Wolfe's lips tightened in disapproval. He detests incomplete information almost as much as he hates leaving the brownstone. What is your next step, Archie? I'm going to track down Melissa Farrington's family and have a chat with Elena. If she cleared the room where her sister died, there's a story there. Wolfe nodded. Proceed. I spent the next hour on my computer, digging up what I could about the Farrington family. Melissa had been a marketing executive at a cosmetics company. Elena, 2 years younger, had worked for the city's Department of Buildings as a fire safety inspector for the past 7 years. Their parents were deceased. Father from heart disease 3 years ago, mother from cancer 8 years back. Elena was married to a Thomas Kelly, an accountant. By 3:30, I was in a taxi headed to the Department of Buildings in Lower Manhattan. The government offices were exactly what you'd expect: fluorescent lighting, beige walls, and the distinct aroma of bureaucracy. I approached the reception desk and flashed my most charming smile at the middle-aged woman behind the counter. "I'm looking for Elena Farrington. Or Elena Kelly, I suppose she might go by. Do you have an appointment?" She didn't look up from her computer. "No, but it's about the Crestmore Grand inspection. I'm working with Nero Wolfe. Sometimes the name opens doors. This wasn't one of those times. Inspector Kelly is very busy. I can take a message." "I'll wait," I said pleasantly, settling into one of the uncomfortable chairs in the waiting area. 20 minutes and 2 gameless games of solitaire on. My phone later, a slender woman in her early 30s emerged from the back offices. She had auburn hair pulled into a tight bun and wore a charcoal pantsuit with sensible shoes. Her face showed the kind of tension that comes from perpetually clenched jaw muscles. "I'm Elena Kelly," she said crisply. "You wanted to see me? Archie Goodwin. I work with Nero Wolfe. We're investigating Victor Hole's death at the Crestmore Grand." Something flickered across her face, too quickly to identify. "The police have already ruled it a suicide. I don't see why a private detective would be involved." "Our client disagrees with that assessment. May we speak somewhere private?" She hesitated, then nodded toward a small conference room, off the main area. Once inside with the door closed, she remained standing, arms crossed. "What does this have to do with me? I merely certified the room as meeting current fire code requirements." "You didn't think it was worth mentioning that your sister died in that very room 5 years ago?" Her posture stiffened. "My professional assessment was unaffected by personal history." "That's quite a coincidence, though, isn't it? Of all the fire inspectors in New York, the hotel gets the sister of the woman who died there. I was assigned the case. I didn't request it. I studied her face. She was good, professional, controlled. But there was something in her. Eyes, grief, certainly. But something else, too. Anger? Guilt? Did you know Victor Hole? I asked, changing tack. Only professionally. I met him during the inspection. Her answer came too quickly. And before that? During the investigation of your sister's death, perhaps? Her eyes narrowed. Mr. Goodwin, I've cooperated with you out of courtesy, but I'm not obligated to answer these questions. If you have concerns about my professional conduct, take them to my supervisor. I'm more concerned about why a hotel manager would choose to hang himself in the exact room where your sister died, a room he had recently insisted on reopening after 5 years. I wouldn't know. Were you aware that Hole had been conducting his own investigation into the original fire? I was fishing, but the brief widening of her eyes told me I'd landed something. That's absurd. The case was closed years ago. Faulty wiring, defective smoke detector, everything was documented. Then why seal the room for 5 years? Most hotels would have repaired it and moved on within months. She uncrossed her arms, her fingers, fidgeting with the cuff of her sleeve. You'd have to ask hotel management. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. As she moved to leave, I decided to play one of my cards. We found part of your business card in room 817. Care. To explain how it got there? She froze, hand on the doorknob. I gave Mr. Hole my card during the inspection. Standard procedure. This one was partially burned. Recent inspections don't typically involve fire. Elena turned. Her professional mask slipped just enough to reveal genuine fear. Mr. Goodwin, you're venturing into dangerous territory. Some things are better left alone. That's not how we work. Then you're a fool. She yanked open the door. This conversation is over. I followed her back to the reception area, where she spoke quietly to the receptionist before disappearing through a door marked Employees Only. As I turned to leave, I noticed a framed photograph on the reception desk that I had missed on my way in. It showed the department staff at what appeared to be a holiday party, and there standing together were Elena Farrington and Victor Hole, his arm casually around her shoulders, both smiling broadly. The timestamp on the photo was December of 2000, last year, months before the room inspection and reopening. I pulled out my phone and snapped a quick picture before the receptionist could object. Elena had lied about knowing Hole, and now I had proof. The question was, what else was she lying about? As I stepped out onto the street, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop looking into Hole's death. Some ghosts should stay buried. Chapter 4. Smoke Signals. Back at the brownstone on West 35th Street, I found Wolfe at his desk, reviewing notes I'd made from my meeting with Elena Kelly. He was frowning, a sign that something wasn't fitting together to his satisfaction. It was 5:50 p.m., 10 minutes before he would head upstairs for his afternoon session with the Orchids. I've sent Saul to the city archives, he said without preamble. He'll obtain the original fire inspection records for the Crestmore. Grand from 5 years ago. I raised my eyebrows. That was fast. The photograph you sent was illuminating. Wolfe leaned back slightly, his massive bulk adjusting in the chair built specially to accommodate it. A connection between Ms. Kelly and Mr. Hole was already implied by circumstance, but confirmed intimacy suggests a narrative more complex than revenge. I nodded. I've been thinking about that. If Elena wanted revenge for her sister, why wait 5 years? And why kill Hole specifically? Precisely. And if we accept that she orchestrated his death, as our initial theory suggests, why choose such a theatrical method? Hanging in the very room where her sister died points to symbolism or message sending, which contradicts a desire for concealment. Wolfe glanced at the clock. I've arranged for Frederick Byrne to come at 9 tomorrow morning. Byrne? The fire inspector who initially signed off on the hotel systems before the fatal fire? The same. I had Theodore place a call. Mr. Byrne is now retired and living in Queens. I was impressed. While I'd been chasing Elena Kelly around Lower Manhattan, Wolfe had been building his own angles. Not that I'd tell him so. His ego is substantial enough. What about the hotel? Staff? I should talk to that housekeeping woman, Maria Delgado, who found Hole's body. Yes, but discreetly. If hotel management is involved in this affair, approaching her directly might put her at risk. Wolfe pushed back from his desk. Now, I must attend to the Orchids. A new Arangus is showing promise. As Wolfe took the elevator up to the plant rooms, I called Fritz on the house phone and asked for a sandwich and beer, then settled in to do what I do second best, paperwork and phone calls. Over the next hour, I managed to locate Maria Delgado's address in Washington Heights and confirmed that she was on paid leave for the rest of the week. I also ran a deeper background check on Miles Braddock, the security chief who'd shown me the door. Ex-military, as I'd guessed. Army Rangers, with a stint in private security overseas before joining the Crestmore Grand 3 years ago. At 7:05 p.m., the doorbell rang. Inspector Kramer of Homicide South rarely arrives at a convenient time, and today was no exception. I let him in and escorted him to the office, where Wolfe had returned from the plant rooms and was examining a new shipment of books. "Evening, Kramer," I said cheerfully. "What brings Manhattan's finest to our doorstep? Did someone steal?" "The commissioner's stapler again?" Kramer ignored me, his unlit cigar clenched between his teeth as he lowered himself into the red leather chair. His broad face was flushed, a reliable indicator that he was already irritated, and not just by my greeting. "You're looking into the Wholey death at the Crestmore," he stated, eyes fixed on Wolfe. Wolfe didn't look up from his book. "Good. Evening, Inspector. I'm engaged by a client on a confidential matter." "Cut the dance, Wolfe. Carter Reynolds hired you to investigate what the department has already ruled a suicide. And you object?" Kramer shifted his cigar from one side of his mouth to the other. "What I object to is you withholding information in a death investigation." Goodwin here was seen poking around the Department of Buildings, asking questions about Elena Kelly. Wolfe finally set his book aside. "Inspector, if you have officially ruled Mr. Wholey's death a suicide, then my investigation cannot possibly interfere with yours, as yours is concluded. New evidence has come to light. That got both our attentions." "What evidence?" I asked. Kramer glared at me, then back at Wolfe. "The knot used in the hanging wasn't one Wholey could have," tied himself. "It's a specialized knot, the kind used in theatrical rigging. Suggests someone with specific knowledge staged the scene." Wolfe concluded. "Exactly." Kramer leaned forward. "And now I find you two sniffing around. What do you know that—" "You're not sharing?" Wolfe's fingers drummed once on his chair arm. "At present, merely suppositions and questions. Nothing that would constitute evidence." "Try me." I watched Wolfe contemplate how much to reveal. He dislikes sharing information with the police, but he dislikes even more having Kramer breathing down our necks. "Very well. We are investigating connections between Mr. Wholey's death and the fire that occurred in the same room 5 years ago. Specifically, the role of Elena Kelly, née Farrington, whose sister died in that fire, and who recently cleared the room for reopening in her capacity as fire inspector." Kramer's eyes narrowed. "That connection is already on our radar. What else?" "Mr. Goodwin discovered evidence suggesting Ms. Kelly and Mr. Wholey knew each other prior to the room inspection, a fact she explicitly denied." "What evidence?" Described the photograph I'd seen at the Department of Buildings. Kramer made a note in his small notebook. "Anything else you're keeping to yourself?" "Nothing of substance," Wolfe replied, which could mean anything from absolutely nothing to 3 crucial pieces of evidence I don't feel like sharing. Kramer grunted, unconvinced. He stood to leave, then paused. "One more thing. We found traces of an accelerant in Wholey's room. Nothing that would have caused a serious fire, just enough to trigger the smoke detector. Except it didn't." "The detector was disabled?" I asked. "Functional, but bypassed. Someone with access to the hotel's fire system made sure that particular detector wouldn't set off the alarm." As Kramer headed for the door, the phone rang. I answered and heard Saul Panzer's calm, measured voice on the line. "Archie, I've got those records. You're not going to believe this." "What is it?" I asked, watching Kramer pause in the doorway, his interest piqued. "The original inspection documents from 5 years ago, before the fire that killed Melissa Farrington. The inspector who signed off on the building's fire safety systems was Elena Farrington herself." I nearly dropped the phone. Elena had certified the very system that failed and killed her own sister. "Are you certain?" I asked, Though Saul doesn't make those kinds of mistakes. 100%. Her signature is on all the paperwork. Whatever. Guilt she's carrying, it's not just about failing to save her sister. She's the one who approved the faulty system in the first place. Chapter 5. Playing with Fire. The next morning's breakfast, Fritz's deviled grilled lamb kidneys with wild mushrooms and a perfect spinach soufflé, was interrupted by a call from Carter Reynolds, checking in from London. I took it at my desk, while Wolfe, who refuses to discuss business during meals, continued his systematic demolition of Fritz's creation. Mr. Reynolds, convenient timing. We've made significant discoveries in your absence, I said. What have you found? His voice carried that mix of authority and impatience I'd come to expect from him. I'd rather not discuss details over the phone. But I'm curious. Did you know Elena Kelly was the inspector who originally certified the hotel's fire systems? 5 years ago? Before her sister died in the fire? A pause. That's impossible. The original inspector was a man. Bernard, or Byrne, something like that. Frederick Byrne, I supplied. He's scheduled to meet with Mr. Wolfe this morning, but the final signature on those documents belongs to Elena Farrington, as she was known then. I had no idea, Reynolds said, sounding genuinely shocked. What does this mean? It means someone is being economical with the truth. Several someones, potentially including you. I beg your pardon? His tone chilled considerably. You hired Nero Wolfe to investigate, Mr. Reynolds. That's what we're doing. I'll call you when we have more concrete information. I hung up before he could respond. A liberty I sometimes take with clients who aren't entirely forthcoming. Wolfe had finished his breakfast and was wiping his lips with a linen napkin. Having heard my side of the conversation, he said, "He claims ignorance?" "Presumably feigned," I reported. Wolfe replied, rising to move to his desk. Few details of the original tragedy would have escaped the hotel owner's attention, particularly ones with liability implications. Frederick Byrne should be here within the hour. Indeed. I had different plans for my morning. I'm going to track Elena Kelly's movements after yesterday's conversation and what Saul discovered. I want to see what she does when she thinks no one's watching. Wolfe nodded. Exercise caution. If our suspicions prove correct, she has already orchestrated one elaborate death. I left the brownstone just after 8:30, taking a cab to Elena's apartment building in Morningside Heights. From a cafe across the street with a convenient window view, I settled in to wait, nursing a mediocre coffee and making notes on my phone. At 9:17, Elena emerged, dressed for work in a navy pantsuit, her auburn hair pulled back severely. Instead of heading toward the subway as expected, she walked 6 blocks west, stopping outside a run-down apartment building that had seen better days around the time Nero Wolfe first moved into the brownstone. She checked her surroundings, not thoroughly enough to spot me half a block behind, then entered the building. I gave her 2 minutes, then followed. Finding a directory in the lobby, among the faded names was R. Martinez 3C. The name clicked. Roberto. Martinez had been the Crestmore Grand's head of maintenance during the fire. I recalled his name from the case file Reynolds had provided. I took the stairs to avoid being trapped in the elevator with Elena and positioned myself in the hallway near 3C, around a corner where I could hear but not be seen. Raised voices carried. Clearly, Elena's controlled tones contrasting with a man's rougher, agitated speech. You promised me it was over, the man, presumably Martinez, was saying. You got what you wanted. It's not that simple anymore, Elena responded. There are people asking questions, private investigators. That's your problem, not mine. I kept my part of the deal. And you were well compensated. But if they trace things back, no one can prove anything. Martinez cut her off. The records are gone, unless you were stupid enough to keep copies. Don't threaten me, Roberto. Remember who has more to lose. Is that right? The way I see it, we're both neck deep. Only difference is I didn't actually kill anyone. The conversation had become too interesting to miss. I slipped my phone from my pocket and started recording. Keep your voice down, Elena hissed. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Holloway was asking too many questions, digging into the original inspection records. He found discrepancies. So you staged his suicide in that room? That wasn't just eliminating a problem. That was sending a message. It worked, didn't it? Reynolds is terrified. He's hiding in London until he hires someone like Nero Wolfe. You think a guy like that doesn't keep insurance, documents, recordings? A sudden silence fell. I tensed, wondering if they'd somehow detected my presence. We need to finish this, Elena finally said, her voice much quieter. The private investigator, Goodwin, he knows too much already, and Wolfe has a reputation. I'm not getting involved in another death. That's your mess. Just hold up your end. If anyone asks, you stick to the story. I heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly retreated to the stairwell. Elena emerged moments later, her composure intact but her eyes darting nervously. She took the elevator down. I waited 10 minutes before approaching Martinez's apartment, knocking firmly on the door. No answer, though I could hear movement inside. I knocked again. Mr. Martinez? I'd like to talk about Elena Kelly and the Crestmore. Grand fire, more silence, then shuffling. The door opened a crack, revealing a face lined with age and hard living. Dark eyes, unshaven jaw, the sour smell of whiskey at 10 in the morning. Who the hell are you? Archie Goodwin, working for Nero Wolfe. I heard your conversation with Elena. I think we should talk. Martinez's weathered face paled. You're the investigator she mentioned. Get lost if you know what's good for you. What exactly was your role in the fire, Mr. Martinez? Or in Holloway's death? I had nothing to do with either. Now leave. He never finished the sentence. His eyes rolled back and he collapsed forward. I caught him before he hit the floor, pushing the door wider to drag him inside. The apartment was a disaster. Empty bottles, unwashed dishes, papers everywhere. Martinez was unconscious but breathing, a small trickle of blood running from the back of his head. I found the wound, a fresh blow to the skull, then checked the apartment. The window to the fire escape was open. Someone had been waiting inside for Martinez to return. As I called 911, I spotted Elena's business card on the floor by the couch, and nearby a half-empty filing cabinet with folders strewn about. Someone had been searching for documents. I quickly photographed everything I could, knowing the police would arrive any minute. As I moved toward the filing cabinet, I heard a creak from the hallway outside the apartment, the distinct sound of a floorboard under cautious weight. Someone was still here, watching, and I had walked straight into their trap. Chapter 6. Ashes to ashes. I flattened myself against the wall next to the door, drawing my gun from its shoulder holster. In my years working for Wolfe, I've pulled it more times than I've fired it, and that's how I prefer to keep the statistics. The floorboard creaked again, closer this time. I steadied my breathing, listening for any further movement. The ambulance would arrive soon for Martinez, but not soon enough for my current predicament. A shadow fell across the sliver of light coming through the partially open door. I tensed, ready to confront whoever had attacked Martinez and was now hunting me. The door began to move. New York Police Department, don't move. I recognized that voice. Sergeant Pearlie Stebbins, Inspector Kramer's right-hand man, and my occasional sparring. Partner? It's Archie Goodwin, Pearlie, I called back. I'm armed but not looking for trouble. A moment of silence. Then, Goodwin, hands where I can see them. Come out slowly. I holstered my gun and stepped into the doorway, hands raised to shoulder height. Pearlie stood in the hallway, service weapon trained on my chest, 2 uniformed officers flanking him. Fancy meeting you here, I said pleasantly. Did Kramer have me followed? Pearlie didn't lower his weapon. We got an anonymous tip that Elena Kelly would be meeting Roberto Martinez this morning. Seems we're late to the party. Not too late. Martinez is unconscious inside, likely concussed. Someone attacked him from behind, probably while I was tailing Elena. Pearlie finally lowered his gun, signaling the officers to check on Martinez. And what's your excuse for being here? Same as yours. Following Elena Kelly, she left about 20 minutes ago, after a rather illuminating conversation with Martinez. I held up my phone. I recorded the good parts. Pearlie's perpetual scowl deepened. That recording comes with us. I'll be happy to share it with Kramer directly, once I've reported to my employer. We engaged in our usual standoff until the ambulance arrived for Martinez. By then, Kramer himself had appeared, red-faced and chewing his unlit cigar more vigorously than usual. Goodwin, he growled. This is officially a police investigation. That recording is evidence. I'm aware, I replied, which is why I've already texted a copy to your office. Professional courtesy. That seemed to mollify him slightly. What did you hear? I gave him the highlights. Elena's implied role in Holloway's death, Martinez's apparent involvement in covering up something related to the original fire, and Reynolds' possible knowledge of it all. Martinez mentioned documents, I added. Someone was searching for them when I arrived. Kramer surveyed the ransacked apartment. Any idea what these documents might be? My guess? Maintenance records from the Crestmore Grand, showing who knew about the faulty fire systems before the fatal fire 5 years ago. Kramer nodded thoughtfully. We'll need a statement from you. And next time, call us before you decide to play hero. I left Martinez's apartment an hour later after giving my statement to a detective who wrote everything down with the enthusiasm of a man documenting his own root canal. The cab ride back to the brownstone gave me time to organize my thoughts. When I arrived, it was 12:40, and Fritz informed me that Wolfe was with a visitor in the office. Frederick Byrne, the retired fire inspector. I entered quietly and took my place at my desk while Wolfe continued his questioning. Byrne was in his 60s, with the leathery skin of a man who'd spent decades around fires, and the weary eyes of someone who knew too much about how things really worked in city government. As I was saying, Mr. Wolfe, Byrne continued, I started the inspection of the Crestmore Grand, but I was reassigned halfway through. Elena Farrington completed it. At whose instruction was this reassignment made? Wolfe asked, his fingers lightly tapping on his chair arm. My supervisor, Thomas Kelly. The same Thomas Kelly who is now Elena Farrington's husband? Byrne nodded. They weren't married then, but they were dating. I thought it was a conflict of interest, having her inspect a major hotel when she was seeing the supervisor, but nobody asked my opinion. Did you document your concerns? In writing, with copies to 3 different superiors? Byrne's mouth twisted bitterly. Fat lot of good it did. After the fire, those documents disappeared from the files. When I pushed the issue, I was encouraged to retire early. Full pension, medical benefits, a generous package for my silence. But now you're speaking, I noted. Byrne glanced at me. A young woman died because someone cut corners. I've lived with that for 5 years. When you called about Holloway's death, I figured it was time to clear my conscience. Wolfe leaned back in his chair. Did you have any direct interactions with Victor Holloway after the fire? He called me about 3 months ago. Said he was conducting an internal review of the incident and wanted my perspective. I told him what I just told you, that I was removed from the inspection, that Elena took over, and that my concerns were buried. And how did he respond? He thanked me and said he'd be in touch. Next thing I heard, he was reopening the room where the girl died. A week after that, he's hanging from a shower rod. Byrne shook his head. Doesn't take a genius to connect those dots. I filled Wolfe in on my morning's activities, including the recording of Elena and Martinez's conversation and Martinez's subsequent attack. Wolfe listened without interruption, his eyes half closed in concentration. Satisfactory, he said when I finished. The picture becomes clearer, though significant pieces remain obscured. Clear enough to see Elena Kelly arranged Holloway's death, I pointed out. Indeed. But she did not act alone, nor was revenge her sole motivation. Wolfe opened his eyes fully. We have established means and opportunity. The complete motive remains elusive. Wolfe instructed me to invite all the principal figures in our investigation to the brownstone for dinner the following evening at 7 p.m. Carter Reynolds, who would be back from London, Elena Kelly, Diana Vance from the hotel, Miles Braddock, the security chief, and Inspector Kramer. Fritz would prepare a suitable menu for 7. And now, Wolfe declared, I shall read for an hour before lunch. I spent the afternoon making the dinner arrangements. Reynolds would indeed return from London the next morning. Elena Kelly initially declined the invitation until I mentioned that we had her recorded conversation with Martinez. Diana Vance and Miles Braddock both expressed reluctance, but agreed to attend when I implied that Reynolds had insisted. That evening, after Wolfe had retired to his room with a book, I received a call from an unknown number. Mr. Goodwin, it was Elena Kelly, her voice tight with stress. We need to meet. I have information about Holloway's death, documents that prove who was really responsible. Why not bring them tomorrow evening? It'll be too late by then. Please, I know how this looks, but I'm not who you think I am. Holloway and I were working together to expose what really happened 5 years ago. Where and when? I asked, against my better judgment. The coffee shop across from my apartment. 1 hour. I hung up, contemplating whether this was a trap. If it was, I'd be walking into it with eyes open. If not, it might be our best chance to understand what was really happening at the Crestmore Grand. Either way, I'd be finding out very soon. Chapter 7. The smoke detector. I took precautions before heading to meet Elena Kelly. First, I called Saul Panzer and arranged for him to position himself across from the coffee shop, giving us 2 sets of eyes. Second, I tucked a small recorder in my jacket pocket. Third, I left a sealed envelope on my desk with everything we knew so far addressed to Wolfe in the event I didn't return. A bit dramatic, perhaps, but prudence has kept me alive this long. The coffee shop was half empty when I arrived 15 minutes early. I chose a table with a clear view of both entrances, and my back to the wall, another habit that served me well. Through the window, I could just make out Saul's compact figure in the shadow of a newsstand across the street. Elena was 10 minutes late, her auburn hair now loose around her shoulders, and her work attire replaced by jeans and a dark sweater. She scanned the room, spotted me, and approached with the cautious movements of a cornered animal. "Thank you for coming," she said. sliding into the seat opposite me. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling slightly as she set her purse on the table. "You mentioned documents?" I prompted, not bothering with pleasantries. She nodded. "They're at my apartment. I couldn't bring them here, too risky." "What exactly do these documents show?" "Everything. Maintenance records proving the hotel knew about faulty smoke detectors months before the fire. Internal memos ordering cost-cutting measures on safety equipment. And the original inspection report, the real one, not the sanitized version that was filed officially." "The one you signed off on?" I reminded her. Her expression hardened. "I was new to the department. Thomas, my husband now, was my supervisor. He altered my report after I submitted it. I didn't discover that until months after Melissa died." "Why didn't you come forward then?" "With what?" "Proof? The originals had disappeared. It would have been my word against his, against the entire department." She paused, swallowing hard. "And then they made it clear what would happen if I caused trouble." "So you waited 5 years and killed Holloway instead?" "Creative solution." Her eyes widened. "I didn't kill Victor. We were working together. He found evidence in the hotel archives that Reynolds had personally overruled maintenance requests to replace the faulty detectors. He reached out to me about 3 months ago. This aligned with what Frederick Byrne had told us, but I remained skeptical. "You expect me to believe Holloway, Reynolds' trusted manager for years, suddenly decided to expose him? Victor had a conscience. When Reynolds announced plans to expand the hotel chain using the same contractors and cutting the same corners on safety, Victor couldn't stay silent. He knew reopening room 8117 would force the issue into the open again. So who killed him?" She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Miles Braddock. He's Reynolds' fixer. Former military, specializes in making problems disappear. Reynolds ordered him to silence Victor and make it look like suicide. And you can prove this? Victor was recording their conversations. He gave me copies for safekeeping." She glanced nervously at the door. "The files are encrypted on a drive hidden in my apartment. I can show you there." Every instinct told me this was likely a trap, but I needed those files if they existed. I stood up. "Let's go." We walked the 6 blocks to her apartment building in tense silence. Saul followed at a distance, as arranged. The evening air had turned cool, and the streets were quieter than usual. That strange lull that sometimes falls over Manhattan neighborhoods after the workday rush, but before nightlife begins. Elena's apartment was on the 3rd floor of a renovated brownstone. She unlocked the door and flipped on the lights, revealing a space that was tastefully decorated but showed signs of recent disturbance. Cushions out of place, papers on the coffee table hastily stacked. "Someone's been here," she whispered, freezing in the entryway. I gently moved her aside and entered first, scanning for immediate threats. The apartment appeared empty, but the desk drawers in the living room stood partially open, and books had been pulled from shelves. "When did you last leave?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "This morning for work? Then I went straight to meet you. I checked the bedroom and bathroom, clear, then returned to the living room." "Where are these files supposed to be?" Elena moved to a bookshelf and reached behind a row of hardbacks, extracting a hollowed-out book containing a small external hard drive. "It's here. I didn't think they'd find it." She took the drive to her laptop on the desk, plugged it in, and entered a long password. After a few clicks, she turned the screen toward me. "Look." The files were organized by date, dozens of them spanning the past year. I opened one at random, an email from Reynolds to Braddock discussing containment. measures for Holloway's increasing indiscretion. Another contained maintenance records from 5 years ago, with highlighted sections showing requests for smoke detector replacements that had been denied, with Reynolds's initials. And then I found the audio files, recordings of conversations, between Holloway and Reynolds, between Reynolds and Braddock, all meticulously labeled and dated. I clicked on the most recent one, timestamped 2 days before Holloway's death. "He's going public next week," Reynolds's voice said. "The board meeting. He's prepared a full presentation on the safety violations, past and present." "I'll handle it," Braddock replied. "Same arrangement as before. Untraceable. Clean." The room reopening gives us the perfect narrative. "Make sure there's nothing that leads back to us," Reynolds insisted. "Use the sister angle if necessary. She's already compromised from the original inspection." I stared at Elena. "They plan to frame you." "Now you understand," she said, copying files to a USB drive. Victor was going to expose everything at the II board meeting. They killed him and staged it to implicate me, knowing my connection to Melissa would make me the perfect scapegoat. As she worked, I noticed a faint smell, barely perceptible at first, then growing stronger. Smoke. I moved quickly to the door and touched it with the back of my hand. Cool, but smoke was now visibly seeping in from underneath. I tried the handle, locked from the outside. "Someone set a fire in the hallway," I said, crossing to the window. 3 floors up. Fire escape on the wrong side of the building. The smoke detectors should have been blaring by now, but the apartment remained eerily silent except for the increasing sound of fire crackling outside the door. I checked the smoke detector on the ceiling. Its small light was dark, disabled. "History repeating itself," I muttered, reaching for my phone to call for help. Elena looked up from the computer, her face pale with realization. "They're trying to kill us the same way Melissa died." Chapter 8. Fire and Justice. My encounter with smoke and locked doors is a tale best saved for another time. Suffice it to say that Saul Panzer's vigilance, the timely arrival of the FDNY, and my own reluctance to become a roasted version of Archie Goodwin combined to ensure that both Elena and I escaped with nothing worse than smoke-stained clothes and rattled nerves. The evidence, the hard drive containing Holloway's recordings and the incriminating documents, survived intact in my pocket. By the time we reached the brownstone on West 35th Street, it was past midnight. Wolfe, naturally, was asleep, as he retires at 11 sharp, regardless of murders, fires, or the potential end of the world. I secured the evidence in the safe, installed Elena in the south room, where we occasionally house clients in need of protection, and finally crawled into my own bed at 2 a.m. The next morning brought Wolfe's raised eyebrows at the breakfast table when he found us both there. Elena in borrowed clothes, courtesy of a previous female guest. Me sporting singed hair and smelling faintly of smoke despite a thorough shower. "Archie has acquired a dramatic flair in his investigative methods," he remarked dryly after I'd related the previous night's events. "Nearly getting cremated wasn't in my plans," I replied. "But the evidence we recovered makes everything clear. Reynolds and Braddock orchestrated Holloway's death and tried to frame Elena, who was working with Holloway to expose the cover-up of the original fire." "Indeed." Wolfe turned to Elena. "I presume, Miss Kelly, that you can establish your whereabouts at the time of Mr. Holloway's death?" "I was at a department meeting," she answered, her composure returning after the previous night's ordeal. 20 witnesses, plus security camera footage of the building entrance. Satisfactory, said Wolfe. Archie, you will deliver the evidence to Inspector Kramer immediately. What about tonight's dinner? I asked. It proceeds as planned, with one modification. You will ensure Inspector Kramer brings officers sufficient to make multiple arrests. I delivered the evidence to Kramer personally, enduring his predictable irritation at what he called my reckless vigilante theatrics. But even he couldn't dismiss the recordings and documents that clearly implicated Reynolds and Braddock in Holloway's murder. This doesn't fully exonerate the Kelly woman, he warned, chewing vigorously on his unlit cigar. She still signed off on the faulty inspection 5 years ago. Under pressure from her supervisor, her future husband, and the documents show her original report was altered. Listen to the whole story before you start making arrests. I'll make arrests when, and if the evidence warrants it, he retorted. Including you, if you interfere with my investigation again. I grinned. See you at dinner. By 6:45 that evening, everything was in place. Fritz had prepared a meal worthy of Wolfe's standards, a crown roast of pork with apple and sage stuffing, Duchess potatoes, asparagus with hollandaise, and a chocolate souffle for dessert. Wolfe was at his desk, massive and immobile as a mountain. I stood by my desk, observing as the guests arrived. Reynolds came first, having returned from London that morning, looking haggard but maintaining his imperious demeanor. Diana Vance arrived next, elegant and professional as always. Miles Braddock entered cautiously, his eyes surveying the room with the practiced assessment of a security expert. Elena Kelly was already present, having remained at the brownstone all day. Thomas Kelly, her husband, had been added to the guest list at Wolfe's instruction. Last to arrive was Inspector Kramer, accompanied by Sergeant Stebbins, who positioned himself unobtrusively near the door. Once everyone was seated, Wolfe never conducts business during meals. Fritz served dinner in the dining room. Conversation was stilted, with undercurrents of tension so thick you could have cut it with one of Fritz's carving knives. Only Wolfe seemed entirely at ease, appreciating the food with his usual methodical enjoyment. After dinner, we returned to the office. Wolfe settled into his chair, dabbed his lips one final time with his napkin, and then fixed his gaze on the assembled group. I have invited you here, he began, because each of you is connected to 2 deaths. Melissa Farrington's 5 years ago, and Victor Holloway's last week. Both occurred in room 8117 of the Crestmere Grand Hotel, and both resulted from deliberate actions, not accidents or suicide. Reynolds started to protest, but Wolfe silenced him with a raised hand. The facts, once properly arranged, tell a compelling story. 5 years ago, Mr. Reynolds, your hotel installed substandard fire safety equipment to reduce costs. When maintenance staff reported problems, you suppressed those reports. You needed the building to pass inspection, so you exerted influence on the Department of Buildings, through Thomas Kelly, who instructed his subordinate and romantic interest, Elena Farrington, to conduct the inspection. Thomas Kelly shifted, uncomfortably in his chair. When Ms. Farrington submitted a report noting deficiencies, Mr. Kelly altered it before filing. The hotel passed inspection with these compromised systems in place. Months later, a fire occurred, and Melissa Farrington died when the smoke detector in room 817 failed to activate. Wolfe turned to Elena. You discovered this alteration after your sister's death but lacked proof. Recently, Victor Holloway uncovered maintenance records and internal communications, revealing the cover-up. He contacted you, and together, you plan to expose the truth at an upcoming board meeting. This is preposterous, Reynolds interjected. You have no evidence for these wild accusations. On the contrary, Wolfe replied, we have substantial evidence, including recorded conversations between you and Mr. Braddock discussing the elimination of Mr. Holloway and the framing of Ms. Kelly. Braddock's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened on the arm of his chair. Mr. Braddock staged Holloway's death as a suicide, using a theatrical knot he was familiar with from his military background. The location, room 817, was chosen specifically to implicate Ms. Kelly through her connection to the original tragedy. When that proved insufficient, you attempted to eliminate both Ms. Kelly and Mr. Goodwin last night, again using a staged fire with disabled smoke detectors. Wolfe nodded to Kramer, who stood. Carter Reynolds and Miles Braddock, you're under arrest for the murder of Victor Holloway and the attempted murder of Elena Kelly and Archie Goodwin, Kramer announced. Thomas Kelly, you're under arrest for falsifying government documents and conspiracy related to the death of Melissa Farrington. As Stebbins and the officers Kramer had stationed outside moved in to make the arrests, Reynolds lunged toward Elena. You think this is justice for your sister? You'll regret this. My lawyers will... Braddock, showing more intelligence, remained silent as he was handcuffed. Thomas Kelly seemed to collapse in on himself, unable to look at his wife. Diana Vance, who had remained silent throughout, finally spoke. I had no knowledge of any of this. The hotel's reputation will be destroyed. Perhaps, Wolfe replied, but its safety standards may improve as a consequence. After the police had departed with their prisoners, Elena remained briefly. Thank you, she said simply. Melissa deserved better, as did Mr. Holloway. Wolfe agreed. Justice, like truth, often emerges only after considerable effort. Later that night, after Elena had left and the brownstone had returned to its normal tranquility, I completed my final report on the case while Wolfe tended to his orchids. Justice had been served, though at a high cost. 2 people dead, careers ruined, a prestigious hotel's reputation in tatters. All because someone had decided that safety measures cost too much. As Wolfe often observes, murder is never simple, and its consequences extend far beyond the immediate victim. In this case, the smoke detector that failed in room 817 had ultimately exposed not just a negligent hotelier, but the corruption that had allowed his negligence to go unchecked. The fire that had taken. Melissa Farrington's life had finally been put out, but the embers of its aftermath would continue to smolder in the lives of all it had touched. Thanks for joining us for today's mystery. Did you suspect that hotel owner Carter Reynolds was behind everything before Wolfe gathered everyone in his office? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this adventure with Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin, don't forget to hit subscribe for more mysteries daily. Until next time, remember that justice, like Wolfe's orchids, sometimes requires patience before it blooms. This is Alie, signing off from Café Tales.